So, Gamera Rebirth was exactly what I wanted it to be right off the bat. The first episode was perfect. You spent about 20 or so minutes following these kids around with cuts to these two adults, and as it went on, you know, there's a little conflict between Boko, Joe, and June and these American boys that are there because, well, the American military are currently in Japan in this story. Well, during this little conflict between the boys, Gauss attacks. And they were as horrifying as I wanted it to be, with them viciously eating people. And the kids managed to, get into an arcade and they're trying to hide out, but one of the Gauss gets in there and starts following them around. Then the military starts trying to fight the Gauss, and they can defeat some of the smaller ones, but the larger ones are too fast. And regardless of the size, every single one of the Gauss can fire their lasers. Basically, it's a vibration thing. It was explained pretty well in the 90s, the first Gamera film in the Heisei era. Basically, they vibrate to a point where it creates an energy laser that's capable of piercing through pretty much anything. And yeah, they were as horrifying as I wanted it to be. So the show balanced out being both a kind of kid friendly at times because it followed these boys, and then it flipped on a dime whenever the kaiju were around, and the kaiju were horrifying. And they did a very good job adapting changes to the different kaiju. And now, the main plot of the story you think is just simply all these monsters are chasing after these boys, and Gamera shows up to save the day. Well, there's a little more to it, which is 100,000 years ago, when all these kaiju were created, they were concerned about overpopulation. So that's why they created the kaiju. So the kaiju would eat humans to decrease the population. Yeah. So, anyways, they made a failsafe basically to control it, where there would be like this psychic link between a monster and a little boy. The monster would then eat said boy and then proceed to be able to take out 90%, 99% of the human population. And then they would be able to control it as it did that. Well, some people went against him and created Gamera. And Gamera would protect this boy from the other monsters. And then they lost control of the monster that they made. And almost all of humanity was wiped out 100,000 years ago. And this is all the background plot before the story really goes on. So, turns out Boko is that boy in this time period. He is the one with the highest psychic link ability, and that's why Gamera shows up to save him constantly. And Gamera is not interested in hurting humans as best as he can. He just tries to focus on defeating the monsters. And I thought it was a little weird where they knew the name of every single monster, these two adults, and they could just name every single one of them that popped up. Um, and then it turns out that one of them was the main villain of the whole story. Basically, they thought the world was out overpopulated, Bill Gates, and that they wanted to wipe them all out so they could be in control of everything. The WEF, sorry, conspiracy theories right there. But seeing Jiger back was really cool. But I think of the monsters, I liked Virus and I liked Giron the best. Giron was so Jiger would probably be a mix between cat and lizard, from the way it was fighting. Zegra was more of a manta ray than a shark, and um, I gotta say though, Giron, I don't know if you've ever seen River Monsters, but The most horrifying one I think the guy ever caught was when he was in Japan, because he was looking into the origin of the history of the Kappa, and he caught some sort of salamander thing, and it was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen because its mouth would literally open 180 degrees. And it's like, oh yeah, look at this. That's like, I don't know, 5 degrees, give or take. Imagine being half of, like, a literal straight plane. That's its mouth, wide open. And Giron screamed of that. And the way it was fighting and how dangerous it was, and the fact that it was the one that did the most damage on Gamera of all the monsters that he had to fight. Uh, yeah, Giron was awesome. I don't want to do too much spoilers of different things, but the different monsters were all pretty cool, and Virus was built up to be like the strongest of all of them. But yeah, there overall I enjoyed this a lot, and there was a sequel bait at the end. Hopefully it gets a decent amount of watch time, but I don't think it's going to hit the same kind of numbers as the One Piece show, which apparently is breaking almost 200 million watch hours already. Um, and deservedly so. It was very solid, but as far as Gamera Rebirth, I hope that it gets watched a lot. It was very good. I loved the darker tone to Gamera works really well. And one of the things I like about it is Gamera can get injured. Godzilla usually, I love Godzilla, but he walks off injuries left and right. With this, Gamera was progressively getting more beat up throughout the show, but he just kept going and going and going. Every time he got knocked down, he would get back up, and it was great. Um, I highly suggest it, but it is not a kid show, especially when you get to the first episode and the Gauss start literally ripping people out of buildings and you see them eating them whole and everything else. They're a little disturbing. And then, of course, the other monsters are eating people too, but it wasn't quite as graphic as Gauss.